Remember when Marge Simpson had beef with Barbara Bush? Probably not. On October 1st, 1990, People magazine published an interview with First Lady Barbara Bush, where she says, "The Simpsons is the dumbest thing I've ever seen," and goes on to describe how they're a bad example for Americans. Marge didn't like that, so she wrote a letter. One of my favorite quotes is, "I try to teach my children, Bart, Lisa, and even little Maggie, always give somebody the benefit of the doubt and not talk badly about them, even if they're rich." Another great line, "If we're the dumbest thing you ever saw, Washington must be a good deal different than what they teach me at the current events group at the church." In reality, the Simpsons writers wrote it, but they got the point across, and Barbara Bush sent an apology letter. This was the inspiration for the 1996 episode, Two Bad Neighbors. America used to be a proper country. On June 8, 1958, 19-year-old David Isom wanted to go for a swim. He headed to the local pool in St. Petersburg, Florida. That doesn't sound crazy, but David Isom is black, and the pools in St. Petersburg have been segregated the year prior. Instead of going to the dirty pool that black people were supposed to use, nicknamed the South Mole, he headed to the spa pool, and the craziest thing happened. The cashier at the pool doesn't even try to stop him from buying a ticket. There's over 40 white people in the pool that day, and most of them do not care. Some look on with confusion, most just continue their swim. Nobody leaves, nobody harasses David. The lifeguard on duty, Tommy Chinnis, said he was like everyone else. Now, after David left, the manager of the spa pool, John Go, kicked everyone out, went on a racist tirade, and drained the pool. The city manager, Ross Wyndham, kept the pool and the attached gym closed for a whole year. City council fired them both and reopened the pool in 1989. When asked about it by his local newspaper, Isom said, "I feel that it's not a privilege, just a right." You know who I love? Casual Geographic. Let me rephrase that. I love his content. I'm sure he's a nice guy, but love is a strong word, and I don't even know him. Like history, I've always liked learning about animals, but I'm not getting in an enclosure with any of them. Zookeepers are brave people. One such person is Mary Jeanette Wilson. She was born in Baltimore in 1937, and in 1961, she got a job at what was then called the Baltimore Zoo, but is now called the Maryland Zoo. Arthur R. Watson, who was the head of the zoo at the time, said he hired her because of a love of animals and a willingness to work hard. It was that simple back then. She worked with mammals, quickly specializing in gorillas, big cats, and elephants. Coworkers stated she would always treat them like animals, meaning she always looked them in the eye, was firm with what she wanted, and was always fair, but never lacked compassion. She worked at the zoo for 38 years. In that time, she became the first black senior zookeeper. At the time, she was only one of a handful. Even today, the zoo still has otters named Mary and Wilson in her honor. In 1954, Israeli Defense Minister Pinhas Levan was forced to resign from office after ordering bombs to be placed in the consulates of the United States and Great Britain. The purpose of these bombs was to kill Egyptian officials and blame the United States. See, in the early 1950s, the United States had encouraged Great Britain to remove their troops from the Suez Canal and let Egypt be Egypt. Israeli officials felt that without Great Britain constantly keeping watch over Egypt, the land they occupied would be stolen. Ironic. So, they planted bombs with hopes that resulting loss of life would be blamed on Muslims, communists, or general malcontents. They hoped this would destroy relationships Egypt had built with the United States and Great Britain. The plot was foiled. Israeli spies worked hard to disrupt world powers, but MI6 works even harder, and the CIA taught them how to play the game. But sometimes the Egyptians just need to pick up the phone. This is a photo of R. Wiley Brownlee on April 3rd, 1971. The worst day of his life. Brownlee was a high school principal in Ypsilanti, Michigan. 16% of his students were black, and he goes to a school board meeting inspired by Michigan Representative John Conyers, who proposed MLK Day every year starting in 1968, and Brownlee suggests they celebrate MLK Day. Before the meeting was over, the KKK had assembled. One vehicle followed Brownlee home, and another blocked the bridge, so he was trapped. They put a gun to his head and forced him out of his car. They poured boiling hot tar on him, followed by feathers, and then they beat him for over 2 hours before fleeing. He made it back to school to seek help, where this photo was taken by a student. He went to work the next day, and for the rest of the year, the town didn't have a single racially motivated crime. They fired him in 1972. He went on to have a great career anyway, and he stood by what he did until he died in 2004. Steve Henson of Nebraska moved to Alaska in 1945 to work as a plumbing contractor. I couldn't do it, but it was a smart move because he was able to retire at 35. Please blow me up, YouTube, because I am close to 35, but I am not close to retirement. In Alaska, he comes up with the recipe for a ranch because it's cheap, doesn't require a lot of ingredients, and Alaska wouldn't have them anyway. They moved to California in 1956, where he purchases a dude ranch, which is basically a bed and breakfast. There, he serves it with salads, the local tavern gets a batch, and it becomes popular. He starts selling packages through the mail for 75 cents. He's getting to the money. In 1957, it hit stores, and it's an automatic hit. By the 90s, it's the top-selling salad dressing in the United States and Canada. But beyond those two, most of the world isn't even aware of its existence. That's why the Netherlands has cool American Doritos instead of Cool Ranch. We really got the world eating salad dressing flavored snacks. Everyone loves astronauts. They're cool, but the thing is, they can't do what they do alone. Someone has to make sure the ship is in shape, the launch goes right, and in an underrated role, someone has to make sure the suits are safe. Someone like Sharon Caples McDougal. She graduates from Moss Point High School in 1982 before going straight into the Air Force as an aerospace physiology specialist. After 8 years, she joins Boeing Aerospace Operations, which is a nice way to say a division of NASA. She's the first black suit technician. In 1992, she suits up Dr. Mae Jemison, the first black woman to go into space.
But I wanted to make sure that I was assigned to her because I just felt like I was the best one for the job.
In 1994, she again breaks barriers, becoming the first black crew escape equipment crew chief. In 1996, she leads the first and only all-female suit tech crew. In 2004, she becomes the first and so far only black person to lead the CEE department. In 2012, she retires with over 20 missions under her belt. Do you know what a bantam is? It's a small and very aggressive bird. If you lived during World War I, it was also a special kind of troop. Who are these soldiers? Men between 5 foot and 5'3" who have been recruited to fight in the war. The idea came from bantamweight boxers, and the men were recruited from coal mining towns. Why? Because if you're in a coal mining town, every man mines coal, and coal miners are not weak. Their logic behind this is so ridiculous, but it works. Over 3,000 men sign up, and they end up with 3 battalions instead of 1, and lower the height requirement to 4'10", because these short kings were ready to rumble. This wasn't just some mascot thing either. They fought in major battles and were well respected for it. In fact, they were so good, Canada copied Britain's idea and created their own bantam battalions. I guess it's true what they say. It's not about the size of the dog, but the size of the fight and the dog. Have you ever seen a turnspit dog at work? No, you haven't. Don't lie to me. They've been extinct for a very long time, but there were plenty of them back in the 1800s. Some say they were a terrier, some say they were a corgi. Nobody knows because nobody cared to keep them. They used to work the turnspit in the kitchen. They ran on a wheel that was often elevated. The wheel would be attached to pulleys and levees, and they would rotate food over an open flame. Imagine eating a dog in a giant hamster wheel hanging from the ceiling to cook a meal. Usually, people will have 2 dogs because they work in shifts. Now, people just have dogs on the counter because they can. It wasn't all bad. Queen Victoria had a soft spot for them, and when the dogs would get too old, she would take them in as her pets. They also had work as foot warmers in churches because we've all been to a church service that lasted too long. People love a dog with a job, unless it's a police dog, or a bow-legged one that has been made obsolete by technology.
Somebody's bleach blonde, bad built butch body
That would not be engaging in personalities, correct?
Several countries around the world keep lists of language used in parliament that is unparliamentary. It's a good reminder for members of which words or phrases they should not be using. Australia and New Zealand have the best, so here's some highlights because we all love it. From Australia, I referred to the leader of the opposition as the Eeyore of Queensland politics. They were exciting times in my household during that era because my son, very proudly, was the arse of the ass. From New Zealand, you have the energy of a tired snail returning home from a funeral. Blank could go down the Mount Eden sewer and come up cleaner than he went in. His brains could revolve around the inside of a peanut shell for 1,000 years without touching the sides.
Just curious, just to better understand your ruling, if someone on this committee then starts talking about
1881 was a strange year where the United States had 3 different presidents. The first was Rutherford B. Hayes. He was finishing his presidential term that came to an end on March 4th, 1881. James Garfield was sworn into office and began his term. However, it would be a short term. On September 19th, Garfield was assassinated. A dark side note is Abraham Lincoln's son Robert Todd Lincoln was an eyewitness to this assassination, one of 3 which he was in the direct vicinity of. On the 21st of September in 1881, Vice President Chester A. Arthur became President of the United States, the 3rd of that year. Talk about a team effort. In 1958, the United States created Project A-119. The goal was to detonate a nuclear bomb on the moon. I'm serious, they wanted to blow up the moon. Why? Because the explosion would be visible from Earth and they could scare the Soviets with it. At least that's what it seems like the plan was on paper. It was part of the space race, and someone thought launching a nuclear bomb to the moon would be more impressive than launching a satellite or sending a man to the moon. The only reason the plan wasn't executed is because a few people in the Air Force knew it was stupid. But this was such a poorly kept secret, it led to the creation of two different treaties. In 1963, the Partial Nuclear Test Ban, which banned detonating nuclear bombs in the atmosphere. Then in 1967, the Outer Space Treaty, in which it was agreed no bombs would be detonated in outer space. On April 4th, 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated at the Lorraine Hotel in Memphis, Tennessee, where he had been speaking in favor of black sanitation workers who had been on strike since March of that year. However, this was not the only assassination attempt made on his life. While he endured many threats and even attempts, the attack on September 20th, 1958 was without a doubt the most dangerous prior to the one that would take his life. On that day, in a New York bookstore, Izola Curry would make an attempt on King's life, shouting that he would have killed her first. It was an attack that would leave him hospitalized and fighting for his life in a Harlem hospital. In 1960, Frank Roscoe Beckwith became the first black American to ever run for president in one of the two major parties in the United States. Before that, he had a career as a rather important lawyer in Indianapolis. In 1935, he lobbied before the state to provide free bus rides to school children. He pushed for the police force to hire black officers, hire more black people at higher wages at the Indiana General Hospital, which will become Wishart and is currently Eskenazi. He ran for a few different local offices and lost all of them, but in 1960 he ran for president. He got destroyed by Barry Goldwater in the Indiana primary, who then lost to Richard Nixon. But he had a key takeaway. He told Jet magazine that the Republican Party should stop hating poor people, laborers, minorities, and women, or they would forever lose their chances of winning. Unfortunately, Republicans don't read Jet magazine, so they doubled down on it all. Despite his warning and history of integration in Indianapolis, his legacy has been treated as nothing more than a footnote. In 1902, President Teddy Roosevelt refused to shoot a bear on a hunting trip. As a result, teddy bears were invented and sold like crazy. In 1909, William Howard Taft becomes president, and the man loves two things: reminding black people, their servants, and roasted possum. People would bring him possum in cages, and he ate them. It's a country thing, I've had it, stringy, but fine. Cartoonists and toy makers try to make Billy Possum a thing, and it fails. Teddy bears are forever. But Billy Possum does make a brief comeback. A few administrations later, Calvin Coolidge has a cage built for his pet raccoon, Rebecca. When he leaves office, the cage is empty. Herbert Hoover takes office next, and a stray possum takes over the cage. Hoover names it Billy Possum and makes it the White House pet. It once again fails to become a commercial success because possums are cheap food, not cute toys.